Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Freedom Forum, and I'd like to welcome our panelist from Canada. Welcome, Robert Klinck.
Good to be again. Good to be with you again, Arnie.
No worries. Pleased to have you, Robert. And Wallace Klinck. Welcome,
Nice to
Wallace.
be here, Arnie. Nice to be there. And so far in the West, we seem to be avoiding the warming Earth.
Ah, yes. Well, we're having winter, so we're avoiding the warming Earth. Although
Oh,
we had a couple of lovely days in the low 20s for winter. It's not unusual, but it's lovely when you have it. We're back to mid-teens again. So look out, it's blisteringly cold when we've got mid-teens. I didn't say like mid-teens below zero, it's actually above zero. So you blokes wouldn't know that, almost wouldn't know it even in summer. So
yeah, right.
it certainly is, but I think it's a very good point. We touch on this each week and we make fun of it. But the fact is, I'm living quite comfortably at plus 15 and I have worked in plus 45. I have worked for weeks at a time in plus 45. And there you are, Canada, and you can see minus 15. You can also see minus 45. What a what a difference in temperature range, and yet we can still accommodate it. We're actually capable of managing that variance. We can accommodate
Yeah.
it. We can actually work this through for our communities, whole cities, whole nations work through your cold weather, and whole nations work through our hot weather, and we just work it through. So
Well, necessity is the mother of invention, they say. We adapt.
that's right.
And the Earth is a habitat that we can survive in, which is very good.
Mm,
It's very fortunate, isn't it?
it is. That's right. And
Well designed.
mankind. You look at the map behind us of the world. Near the equator, you have the deserts, and near the poles, of course, you've got the ice caps, the freezing areas where you can see temperatures as low as minus 90. Um, and I think it touches on something here, and that is this discussion, if you like, this debate about climate change, and this debate within climate change about proposing handing power to a central authority dominating over the whole world to be administered by the United Nations. These are very profound step changes in our thinking. And the thinking is one of, if you like, a change from one of freedom, where people and communities and nations considered freedom to be their justification for establishment, if you like, is that individuals within community can be free to work through their own life. And now it is that these same institutions are advocating essentially a tyranny of world power over people, world power on the justification that the climate on the earth is changing. Whether it is or whether it isn't, whether we can adapt or whether we can't, this is the justification. The policy is world power, whereas the previous policy, the establishment of communities, of governments, of nations, was in the pursuit of freedom. So there's a difference. There's a clear difference in policy, one of freedom, one of totalitarianism. Now, I'm going to open the floor because the title for today is Justification for the National Dividend. I believe I've laid the groundwork, the national dividend being essentially the outworking of a policy of freedom. Wallace Clink.
Well, yes, Arnie, the thing of it is we have had the capacity to change our environment. For some reason, human beings have been given that possibility. And that possibility has led us to associate in various ways, which have led to accomplishments, which we can call the increments of association. When we associate, we as in association can achieve things that we cannot achieve as individuals because we all have different contributions to make, and the contributions end up giving us more than we could as individuals, working as individuals, achieve. In other words, we have a profit in association. And that profit in association is something that doesn't just relate to energy expended in, ergs energy over time. it is something that is just in the nature of things, that when you learn something, you learn a technique, then someone else can build on that. And the very knowledge itself leads to an increment that just grows and grows and grows.
Mhm.
And so that this is the basis of our civilization. The only problem is that the way our economy works, our financial system, we are not able to deliver the full benefits of that profit from association to the individual, to
Mhm.
the benefit of the individual, to
Mm.
make the individual freer, more independent economically, so that they can be freer and more independent in every other way. In
Mm.
other words, to help individuals to choose
Mm.
whether or not they will refuse one thing at a time.
Mm. I think that's most profound, Wally, because what you're highlighting in my mind is that if the individual is given financial independence, then he's free to go and do what he likes within reason, providing he doesn't adversely affect his neighbour. And that freedom is an outworking of a financial policy. Now, the finance, the economics, the existing policy is one of scarcity, and yet we look outside and we look as never before. There's the industry, there's the advanced control, the robotics, the yoke, the burden of physical labor is being removed minute by minute from man's shoulder, and it's being placed onto the machines. The question is one of pursuit of policy. Is it one of freedom, or is it one of totalitarianism or tyranny? Robert Klinck.
The Industrial Revolution, I've always thought, should have led to the natural principle that this vastly expanded productive capacity should be conveying benefits to the population. And I thought probably the national dividend should have been instituted when this vast expansion of productive capacity occurred.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't, because it coincided with a very strong puritanical hierarchy in the various societies that were benefiting from the development. And Puritans want to keep people disciplined by keeping their nose to the grindstone. They are afraid of human freedom, because they my mind is going again.
They want to exercise power over people, and
They do, yeah.
yeah,
That's the fundamental concept of Puritanism, that there
mm,
has to be an elite that decides for the community as a whole.
mm-hmm,
Because if you give individuals freedom, they're going to misuse it
mm,
in the eyes of the
the
elite
elite,
that
yeah,
has power. I
yeah,
mean, why they are allowed to make that decision for everyone is a bit of a mystery, but that they don't shrink from taking that position.
yeah. I see the whole desire within, if you like, the elite to dominate over other people. I mean, it's. I heard it once said by a politician that if you look at the people walking past the Parliament House, what are they concerned with? Well, what are they concerned with? They're concerned with paying the bills, getting tea ready for the children, making sure that the needs of their children are being met as much as they physically can, and also the requirements of work. But are they really? Do they have time to even consider the ramifications of systems that are imposed on them? And of course, it's very, very difficult to break out of that narrative when it becomes such all-consuming that it's just from work to home, to the work at home, and back to the work at work, and then back to the work at home. There's no time for leisure. There's no time for contemplation. Given an opportunity for leisure or contemplation, it would certainly become apparent very, very quickly. And that's why in this day of advanced control, robotics, automation, people are working longer and longer and longer. And it really is the opposite of what should actually be happening. Wallace Klinck.
Well, and the insidious thing about it is that people, if you want to give the Puritans any ground at all, and I'm not inclined to do that, they are insecure, probably, basically, because they view the world and they see scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
They have to work, and they have to work hard for what they get, and they think that everyone else should have to work hard for what they get.
Mm.
And they don't see the abundance that is before their face.
Mm-hmm.
As I've said before, we can destroy Europe twice in the last century. Yeah, incredible. We can afford to do that. And everybody thinks that's a really patriotic thing to do. But we can't provide the basics for our people. I just heard recently, just yesterday, I think it was, that there are an increasing number of homeless people in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
And even with the new president, who claims that he has given a great boost to the economy, apparently this phenomena is worsening. So, you know, the thing of it is, it's a question of reality and perceived reality. We measure everything by money. But money only embraces a limited aspect of our potential activity. It constrains us because we have a system of ownership combined with legal rights, which literally shrinks the whole perception of the economy. And we just don't realize the abundance that is there. And so the Puritan wants to control everybody else because they feel that if everyone else does not lift their load and carry their load, then that will somehow or another put a further burden upon the Puritan in trying to survive. And so he's constantly stressing the idea of responsibility, hard work, carrying your load, doing your share, being responsible, even if it means destroying the earth. You know, it's a tremendous psychological mirage, psychological thing that's been perpetrated on mankind.
That's a very excellent, very excellent. It's an excellent illustration, Wally, because the fact is that we talked about at the start of this forum how weather, the narrative of weather and changing weather and adaptation, and how if you actually just stop and think about it, the capacity within man to adapt to variabilities is enormous. And then you look at the narrative of the financial system, that there is a shortage. A shortage of what? There's certainly not a shortage of bombs or bullets. There's no shortage for that. There's no shortage for productive capacity for other nations like China or India or Korea, any third world nation where it has essentially a bowl of rice a day for the workers. There's no shortage of industrialization there. So you come back to the Western world. Oh, but it's too expensive to what? And when you measure expense, what are you actually saying? Are you saying that the advanced control, robotics, the automation couldn't be established in our own nations, and it couldn't produce all the necessary goods for it? All it takes is political will. But the fact is, as climate as a subject is manipulated and the narrative is placed in our mind, we get confused. We get confused thinking that this whole thing has to be handed over to some sort of central power. So it is with finance. We get confused. We think there's actually a shortage of money. Now, money itself, 97% of money, is only in the form of computer blips. 97%. It's only 3% is actually ever printed or coined. 97% is only blips. It's a measure system, like a kilometre or a kilo or a pound or a mile. It's a system of measuring a value. You place a value on it. And you can't tell me that you've got a shortage of measurements. Hello? You haven't got a shortage of measurements. What's happened is that if you like, the financial system has been usurped. It's been taken away from what should belong to the people as a system of measure, and there's essentially a chronic shortage presented as there is always a shortage of money. 1929, the Depression, right through to 1939, a shortage of money, a policy Now, we talked about policy, remember? Policy of freedom or a policy of totalitarianism. The policy of the financial system is one of totalitarianism. It's not about freedom. The national dividend is a policy of freedom. Robert Klinck.
Yes, well, the Puritans always need a crisis in order to justify their control measures. And they have come up with a perfect one in this climate business because it applies worldwide, it applies to every country, although it seems as if the rules are applied with varying degrees of stricture, because some countries don't seem to be required to reduce their carbon footprints as much as others. So if there was, all you see at the international level is a succession of crises. You know, they have the Cold War, and they have the space race, and they have climate problems, either a threat of global cooling, which they had in the 1970s, or now a threat of global warming, although they've sort of retreated from that because they now say the threat is merely climate change. And since climate change is obviously inevitable, that sort of covers all the bases as far as anybody objecting to the concept of climate being a problem goes. But this is what they'll come up with all the time, and they preoccupy people with irrelevant conflicts, such as, you know, political dialectics, which are artificially created. You know, the liberals against the conservatives, and you go back and forth between these two groups, and it's just merely a distraction so that people won't focus on what's really going on in the world. And what's really going on in the world is this fantastic economic evolution that you've been talking about, which is, you know, moving from automation to robotization, and every step that is taken has immense potential for adding to individual freedom. But it's all taken away by the financial institutions, who don't want people to be able to function increasingly as they choose to do.
That's exactly right. The financial system has been weaponized against freedom, and that's a profound point. Wally Klinck.
Financial system is the greatest weapon that has ever been devised by man. It is also the most marvelous thing if it were conducted properly, because civilization could not have emerged without a system of measurement, a system of representation. The problem is that the system has been monopolized and perverted, distorted to centralize power. It's not being used to allow things to happen and allow things to disperse. It's being actively used to centralize both wealth and power. And that is the evil that is about it. And it has different aspects. It has the, you know, in natural law, we're talking about things just flow. We're talking about the ethical aspect, the moral aspect of it, and the actual abundance of the capacity we have developed to produce. So, I mean, the different aspect, and there's a technical aspect, which is exactly that. It's the technical aspect. It's an understanding of how the financial price system actually works in order to create and generate costs, and how it recovers those costs through sales, and how the present system prematurely diverts money so that it is reinvested. It is prematurely canceled its purchasing power, so that it's not available to buy the goods that you are now producing, of which it will be a cost and must enter into prices. So there's a technical aspect of it. But I think the moral aspect of it is the biggest impediment or hurdle to get over, because people have this idea that they really have to work. They must work. And, you know, I mean, we have this enormous industrial system that has lifted the burden from the shoulders of Atlas and given us the really enormous potential for leisure. I mean, you have to make up your mind what human beings are. Are human beings beasts of burden? Or are human beings creative entities that are actually capable of initiative, creative initiative, in order to explore new areas of intellectual activity, new areas of productivity, new areas of everything in life. But you see, we have a whole enormous life in nature, but it's all circumscribed by this financial system that pulls the borders in, pulls the parameters in, and confines us to this limited, and of course, this limited concept of life. And when you have a scarcity, whoever controls the scarcity controls those who need whatever it is, because they have a great power over those people. They can terrorize them, and that's exactly what they do with us.
I read a story once about pepper, and I believe it was the Dutch East Indies or Indonesia, where it was sourced. And this pepper was a, if you like, considered a luxury item, and there were people who held monopoly over it. And an individual went across. Prior to that, actually, I think they even got to the point of controlling that monopoly by burning trees down. Any trees that they found that weren't part of their control, they burnt them down. And this individual found one tree, and he took the seeds from it, and he went elsewhere, and he broke the monopoly. And then the price of pepper went through the floor. There was never a shortage, but the fact is the perceived shortage made pepper so, if you like, expensive. And it was unnaturally expensive. All you had to do was plant your own, if you had the right climate, plant your own seeds and then grow your own pepper tree. And so why should it be a luxury item? But it was. And this is this same type of mentality, this same monopoly over finance. Now, finance has been building monopoly after monopoly after monopoly. There was, in Australia, 100 so years ago, the establishment of the Commonwealth Bank, which was used to finance First World War efforts. But it was emasculated and converted into the Reserve Bank of Australia, run by a board. And since that time, of course, the Australian people have suffered under it. I believe the Bank of Canada is similar, and the Federal Reserve in America is similar. Private institutions controlling what is a monopoly to benefit themselves, to derive their own benefit. And this is insidious because it's a measurement system. Money is a measurement system, and that's all it should ever be. The national dividend, a national dividend is actually in response. If you go to the world debt clock and you go to any nation you like and have a look, and you'll see that this monopoly is imposing debt. It's imposing debt over every single nation. If it's sleight of hand, it's deceit. The national dividend undoes that because it provides sufficient purchasing power, so debt would become a thing of the past. Debt would become a thing of the past, and the power, as the power was held by those pepper merchants, the power of the bank merchants would be undone, and then people would be free to carry on and enjoy their own life as they see fit. Robert Klinck.
Yes, the banks regard money as a commodity, and their game is to keep the commodity in scarce supply in order to maintain control over societies. So the money is not a commodity, or it should not be regarded that way. It should just be regarded as a method of accountancy in order to keep track of cost and payment flows. But that is not the way the banks manage it. The banks manage it in such a way that they have control over the initiative of humans in society. And they have co-opted the population into accepting this because they have this philosophy of Puritanism that they have insinuated into all parts of society, which causes people to look at their neighbor and not want their neighbor to be freer than they are, certainly, and probably a little less off. Well, this is just a race to the bottom, because it's a dreadful mentality to have. You know, in a Christian society, you would want your neighbor to be developing every capacity he has. But this it's institutionalized envy, and they encourage this by their restriction on the availability of money. Now, it seems that if there was a sufficiency of buying power in the economy, such a thing as austerity or recession would be impossible, because there would always be enough to absorb the production. So how can these phenomena be happening? Only because the banks have this monopoly and they maintain an artificial scarcity of money. And the scarcity in a sane society would be made up by the issuance of adequate purchasing power to the population. And this is the rationale for the distribution of a dividend, a national dividend.
Excellent summary, Robert. Thank you for that. We're at the 26-minute mark. Significant comments, please, Wally.
Well, yes, and our the social credit demand for a dividend and for a subsidy of lower prices, or money paid to the retailer at point of sale in order to allow him to lower his prices. This is all backed up mathematically. It's not a question of theory. If you look at the accounts of business, you will see that they all charge increasingly more than they disperse in terms of purchasing power. They have to, because purchasing power is only a portion of total costs. These other costs come in from previous cycles. And so that something has to be done in order to allow the product to move. Business has to recover its costs. So what do? We live off the future. We borrow against the future. But that has absolutely no relationship to the physical process of production and consumption. This is a purely monetary phenomenon that has made it so we are literally slaves. We have to work harder and harder, not to enjoy what we're going to have coming off the line when we get done working on our current product, but so we can go back and obtain what we produced before. And it just gets worse and worse. And we're on this treadmill. We're running faster and faster and faster, burning ourselves out. And, you know, it's an amazing thing. We have this idea, as we've said, of scarcity. And yet, during the recession, the Great Recession of the 1920s, what did they do? They burned their crops. They threw product into the ocean. They cut back on production because they couldn't sell it. Are we therefore poorer? Well, we're certainly poorer financially, but we're not poorer physically. We're poorer physically because of our stupidity. We'd rather destroy than distribute.
That's a very, very important point, Wally. We'd rather destroy than distribute. And the outworking of that, of course, is that the military-industrial complex, if that isn't we'd rather destroy than distribute, I think that's an expression of that very thing. I think if the military-industrial complex built barges and they placed all of what they produce on those barges and took them out into a deep ocean somewhere and just sunk the barges, and then they built some more barges and did more with their weapons, they would be more productive than what they are at the moment, because that military-industrial goes across to other nations and destroys them. And that's, to me, is madness. In order to balance their books, that's what it does. And if you like, this nation of America, this giant world policeman that's going around there interfering with every other nation, and then complains or makes out a complaint that some other nation has interfered with them. I find that that's ridiculous, and that's an outworking of the, if you like, the financial system. They're there doing what they're doing because it's the only way they can keep their nation in the existing narrative, keep their nation going. It is so, so wrong. We could do so much better. The policy of freedom or the policy of tyranny. Robert Klinck, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, so there's a lot of discussion of guaranteed annual incomes these days, and it's very important for people to understand that the national dividend has nothing to do with this concept. The guaranteed annual income is always to be financed out of taxation, which means it's not going to provide an additional infusion of buying power into the community, and it would set the recipients of the income against the payers of the income in a very probably an ultimately violent way, because you'd have a part of the population that's idle and but deriving financial benefits, and the others working like mad in order to keep these fellows going. So the national dividend is a universal dividend. It is paid equally to every citizen, so nobody can complain about being treated in a worse way than anybody else. And it also is an infusion of fresh money into the economy, which would have the effect of eliminating this cascading debt that is, grown to the point where it's a quarter of $250 now. I think they're not talking about trillions anymore. So surely people should be investing some thought, some original thinking into dealing with these economic problems. Unfortunately, as you say, they are kept so busy and distracted with bread and circuses, I guess, that they are not giving it adequate attention. But it's the social credit concept is not only realistic, it's also beautiful, and it's also absolutely Christian. Christ distributed freely without any preconditions, and that was of his abundance.
That's right.
Of abundance,
Yeah, that's
gave
right.
us that demonstration. We're supposed to follow him.
That's exactly right.
Christians would do that.
Yeah, it is a compelling. It's a compelling perspective. Now, I've used the word freedom. I've used the word freedom and tyranny, and you can, if you like, you can transpose that word freedom to be the outworking of Christian policy. It is the same thing. Freedom originates in the individual with the right to choose or refuse one thing at a time. The national dividend places a financial, if you like, inheritance into the hands of the individual so that they can claim their inheritance. Advanced control, robotics, automation, the cultural knowledge accumulated over eons, that developmental knowledge that started with the lever and has now got to the stage where it's we've got machines that can go into space, we've got robots that can produce just about everything, and computers to control them. And that inheritance is there and it belongs equally to each individual in society. That's what the national dividend is about. It is an outworking of the policy of freedom. Wally Klinck, Robert Klinck, thank you so much for today. I really appreciate what we've covered, and no doubt we'll have plenty more to discuss in the future. Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Cheers.
Thank you, Arnie.
Yeah, very important topic.
All right.